He was a drug addict, owning overwhelming wealth and countless women. He was a harum-scarum youth, involuntarily airing the supreme majesty under the pressure of sudden death of his father, who was assassinated by Japanese Kwantung army, killing all potential threats of betrayal, leaving a personal threat of death, and eventually growing into one of the greatest warlords in the early modern China. He established the largest and latest system of education industry of China. He surrendered his domains of 790,000 square kilometers to Japanese intruding army and ran away without mild fight back, while having dominating army with 300,000 troops in hands. He detained the president of China to unite all parties and factions of China in the World War II to save his motherland from tortures of division, poverty, and being completely vanquished. He's one of the most contentious historical figures of China. His name is Zhang Xueliang, the young Marshal. This is Xueliang, the very capital of industrialization of New China, the birthplace of Qing dynasty, where the September 18th incident occurred, and the triumph in Liaoshen campaign. This mansion is the former residence of two generations of Northeast warlord in China in the 20th century. The young Marshal, Zhang Xueliang, who succeeded Warlord of Northeast 3 provinces after his father's assassination, with the mission to rule 27 million population, was unparalleled in Republic of China period due to his family fortune, military influence, and imposing appearance. How did a warlord with such background end up in confinement for 50 years? We have to start the story from his father, the old Marshal. He received little formal education. His military career started from emerging his bandit gang into the imperial army of Qing dynasty. In the fall of 1924, the old Marshal seized control of Peking after defeating the rebels in Zhifeng War, appointed as the last leader of Beiyang government, and accordingly claimed the sovereignty of China, which represented the zenith of his military career. Nonetheless, a haughty spirit before a fall, the zenith was inevitably ephemeral. The old Marshal's expansion has eclipsed Japanese imperialism dream, and the tension between the Northeast Army and Kwantung Army has been exceedingly mounting. On the 3rd May tragedy 1928, Chinese unarmed civilians were brutally massacred by Japanese Kwantung Army. His loath of Kwantung Army has reached unprecedented height. His assertion to China, Chinese warlords united to fight against Japanese, echoes in the world. Abandoning Japanese support risked everything that Northeast Army possessed, triggering confusion, violence, power struggles, and setting himself on a collision course. The militaristic Japan has zero tolerance of the old Marshal casting aside Kwantung Army to embrace Beiyang government of central China. The Kwantung Army believed that the benefits was no longer reciprocal and was anticipating the old Marshal increasingly patriotic policies, thereby going to take the most decisive measure to ensure that Kwantung Army flag never fly over Manchuria. The young Marshal, like other warlords in the same era, was flexible, embracing and co-opting foreign powers into his own state region, yet was excessively vigilant about Japanese radical differences. However, the anxiousness was mutual. According to a classified report of Japanese Supreme War Council, Zhang Xueliang was analyzed as a womanizer, opium addict, and submissive to material, and should be much more malleable to the imperial influence than was his father. Kwantung Army was eagerly expecting full cooperation of the young Marshal. Be that as it may, circumstances dictated otherwise. The young Marshal proved Japanese intelligence was completely futile. The young Marshal had 2 of his pro-Japanese generals executed. Yang was a native of Xueliang and sent to Japan in 1904 to study by Chinese Qing government. He graduated from the Imperial Japanese Army Academy with specialty in artillery. His military career was greatly conducive to his Japanese education background. Nonetheless, the greatest advantages is also the greatest weakness. Attending the birthday party of Yang's father, the young Marshal was prodigiously distraught and mortified of being ignored the whole party. The ordeal of facing Yang and Zhang kept mounting until it excruciates him. He could see himself losing his power and control of northeast China, perhaps his life if Yang and Zhang stealth execution. The young Marshal had fathomed their undying fidelity to his father was preposterous and impossible. He was nostalgic. Nevertheless, to act on it or else, he wouldn't have survived. Adrenaline rushes, an idea wells up. The execution tugged his heart. He used to call them uncles and consider them close family friends, though he also visualized their devilish sort of smile after the old Marshal was assassinated. If they stealthed with Kwantung army, plotting treason could be in any minutes. Gunshots ceased. The second seems heavily tedious. The night went back into tranquil silence, and the sun also rises. The flag replacement was a clear proclaimed allegiance to Kuomintang, which was the most crucial turning point in Zhang Xueliang's life. First of all, it was from the perspective of national unity. The more practical issue was that the strength of Northeast Army was unable to resist Japanese aggression solitarily. Only by reunifying with Nanking government and relying on the strength of whole China can Japanese be contended with. Firmly grasped the power, he vigorously clung his inherent power to infrastructure construction to cope with the economic aggression of Japanese imperialists, and at the same time indulged his luxury material life. It all started when the young Marshal learned English and joined the Fengtian YMCA, and had extensive exposure to European and American cultures. This laid a solid foundation for his broad vision and governing philosophy. He advocated and formulated a set of plans for the development of the industry, agriculture, energy, transportation, cultural and educational projects undertaken in the Northeast. He established numerous railways to prevent Japanese-built Nanman Railway from monopolizing the Northeast. He established the Huludao Navy Port to compete with Japanese-built Lushan Port, presided over the construction of airports and the development of civil aviation. Established Northeast Army's own arsenal, which supported the Northeast Army with cannons and trucks. Zhang Xueliang's major economic measures restrained Japanese economic invasion effectively. It is education that incontestably built impregnable rocks of economic development. According to historical records, Zhang Xueliang donated a total of more than 10 million silver dollars, in which half out of his father's legacy and the other half was out of his own pocket, ranking first in private donations to education in his generation. At a while, there were less than 10 government-funded universities in China. Many of their predecessors were related to Catholic, Protestant, and other missionary colleges, such as Yanqing University, Tsinghua University, Peking University, Furen Catholic University, Nanking Jinling Women University, and the predecessor of Sun Yat-sen University. And the others were connected to the westernization movement in the late Qing dynasty. Northeastern University was the only one owned and funded by the Warlord government, started from scratch by a warlord, courageously. Its funding once accounted for nearly half of China's government-funded universities. It was also the only university in history of China with a warlord leader as its president, which authenticated the great importance of education attached to his governing. He built a large number of buildings and laboratories and purchased experimental equipment from Germany. The renowned scholars researching for Northeastern universities incorporated Liang Sicheng, known as the father of modern Chinese architecture, Zhang Shizhao, famed for being one of the close friends of Mao Zedong, and Liang Suming, known as the last Confucianist of China. Northeastern universities abandoned funding, rapid upgrading, advanced teaching facilities, and numerous renowned scholars are far beyond comparison with any other domestic universities, creating a glorious period in the history of Northeastern University. In 1930, at the age of 29, Zhang Xueliang became the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Arguably, Chiang Kai-shek would not be able to reunify China nominally without the assistance of the young Marshal. In March 1930, to seize the dominance of the central government, Wang Jingwei, together with other local political factions, launched a civil war against Chiang Kai-shek, Nanking central government. At the beginning, Zhang Xueliang remained neutral, kept reconciling the differences between the powers. Still and all, this war raging permeates through the whole central China. To stop the war, Zhang Xueliang sent troops through Shanhaiguan to support Chiang Kai-shek to settle the civil strife, and was therefore promoted by the Chiang Kai-shek as the Deputy Commander-in-Chief. The status was only second to the President of Nanking government. In 1931, Japanese maliciously produced shooting incidents of Zhongshan sailors, the Nakamura incident, and Wanbaoshan incident. The militarism is at brink of war. On the 13th July 1931, Chiang Kai-shek published a report to the compatriots in the nation, resisting foreign aggression after stabilizing the interior. Japanese Kwantung Army launched September 18 incident in order to provoke full-scale war with Northeast Army. Zhang Xueliang then ordered, "Now Japan's diplomacy is becoming increasingly tense. It is urgent to try to be cautious in dealing with every aspect. For Japanese, no matter how troublesome they are, we must tolerate them all, and we must not resist them and cause any further trouble." That order to each genus in the earnest following, Zhang Xueliang. Notwithstanding, when the order came into the hands of the soldiers, it was indeed, "Don't resist, don't move, put your guns in the warehouse and die. Everyone is benevolent and sacrifice for the country." Chiang Kai-shek wrote in his diary, "Instead of negotiating alone and signing treaties of humiliation, it is urgent to entrust it with international arbitration, as there is still hope of fundamental victory." Live through the minutes of 290th political conference of the Central Committee of Kuomintang. The view of Kuomintang officials and Chiang Kai-shek was surprisingly unanimous. The soldiers were clinging to life, withstanding dishonors, and the politicians were deluding in the castle in the air. A page full of humiliation narrated in history of China, with anguished people of the Northeast weeping with blood. At the time, Northeast Army has 17 infantry brigades, 3 cavalry brigades, 1 infantry division, with a total more than 200,000 troops in Northeast region. In the Pingjing region, there were also 110,000 troops under the young Marshal's command, which could reach in Xueliang in 2 days. On the night of the incident, the independent 7th Brigades, stationed in northeast camp of Xueliang, had 7,000 troops. In northeast, the Japanese had only 2 brigades and 6 garrison brigades, about 10,000 people. Counting the Japanese police and veterans in northeast and the 2 Japanese divisions stationed in Korea, there are only more than 20,000 people. At that time, military strength of northeast was the leader among the Chinese faction forces. The northeast arsenal was the only factory in the country that has produced cannons and achieved the mass production of hoister. Ever since falling into the enemy's hand, the arsenal was changed into Kwantung Army Field Weapon Factory, which continuously produced weapons for the Japanese invaders. In 1990, when Zhang Xueliang was interviewed by a media, he said that he had made a major mistake in his judgment about Japanese actions. It was incognitable to believe Japanese was bold to start a full-scale invasion. As a matter of fact, it was cogitable. Japan won the Russo-Japanese War as early as 1905. This is the first example of Asian countries defeating European countries, yellow race countries defeating the white race countries since 19th century. As a result of World War I, Europe has changed its perspective on industrialized Japan. Ever since, Japanese international status was anomalously improved, which greatly enhanced the national self-confidence of imperialists. Following the achievement of Japan, Chinese Qing dynasty started constitutional movement, since the constitutional Japan surpassed the autocratic Russia in a short period of time, expecting to reform Qing dynasty into constitutional monarchy, and Russia was forced to focus more than ever on economic foundation rather than military expansion. It is also exactly the militaristic delusions of Japan that not only they were unraveled in Asia, but also holding a great chance to defeating the US. Unfortunately, science bestowed the immense new power on man, and at the same time created conditions which were largely beyond his comprehension and still more beyond his control. And the last refinements of science are linked with cruelty of Stone Age. It was obstinately inherent perspective of Zhang Xueliang to believe Northeast Army could not defeat Kwantung Army. I knew for a fact that Northeast Army was unable to defeat Kwantung Army, and if we returned to Xueliang, I would become a traitor of China. If we can't fight Japan or return to Xueliang, we can only retreat, wait for the League of Nations to mediate, Zhang Xueliang said. Correspondingly in Europe, de Gaulle, ranked as brigadier general and government minister, as Under-Secretary of State for National Defense and War, who was reluctantly pulled into the aircraft on the last minute by the British Major General Edward Spears, and flew to London on a British aircraft in the hair-raising escape, would understand the young Marshal sentimentally. De Gaulle later told Andrew Marshal, his Minister of Culture and Affairs, of the mental anchorage which was flight to London. It was a symbol of breaking up with the French army and the recognized government, which would inevitably be seen as a treason for the country, had cost him dearly. Excruciated by Japanese soldiers, China fell into completely disarray. Northeast 3 provinces were torn to pieces by Kwantung Army. Cities were set on fire, and unarmed civilians were massacred. We shall not flag or nor fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight inland and on the seas and on the ocean. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our land whatever cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender, even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this land or a large part of it were subjugated and starving. Then our country will carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world with all its power and might set forth to liberation and rescue of the old. This is no war for domination or imperial aggrandizement or material gain. It is a war to establish on impregnable rocks the rights of individual, and is a war to establish and revive the statures of man. We Chinese have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be.